month, I'm building up some weird Warhammer models. You can see me doing that in the background there, but before I tell you what I'm building, let me tell you why I'm building it. Now, like any good video essay, which this isn't by the way, we gotta go back like a decade or two. So back in 2001, before I was born even, Games Workshop released a game called Inquisitor. It is such a weird game. It's halfway roleplay, halfway war game. But I think that this game is probably why most people like the Warhammer setting. Now, let me be clear, on like a gameplay design level, it is kind of bad. It's so complicated. Everything uses D100 rolls, so you gotta take out 2d10 every time you want to roll a dice. You gotta resolve things. You need to determine what out of like 5 or 6 speeds you're moving at whenever you move. But it's really, really cool and really thematic. I think an example of the way that Inquisitor's super complicated, but to a good end, is in the way that you can combine actions. So in a game like Kill Team, you have to move, finish your move, and then shoot. But in a game like this, where it's way more complicated to do anything, there are specific rules for shooting as you move. And in fact, you could jump out of a building's window into the window of another building and shoot as you go. It'll incur a penalty, but you can do it. And some characters can be built around doing specifically this maneuver. Now, as cool as these rules are, I don't think they're anything to do with why you or any other person might like the 40k setting. Now, one way in which you could say this game led GW into the gritty underbelly of 40k is in the art style. I'm going to show you some art right now from the rulebook, and in my mind, this is some of my favourite 40k artwork out there. It's not Space Marines, it's not glorious, it's gritty and creepy and weird, but still so cool and compelling. Likewise, this same underbelly is very much the focus of the fiction here. With the tagline, "Everything you have been told is a lie," it's all about peeling back the facade of the Imperium, looking at how dysfunctional and self-defeating the Imperium is, in particular embodied by the Inquisitors, who will kill each other just as much as they will kill the enemies of mankind, simply because they have a different philosophy about their personal mission. It's a game about stories in the margins, and this book embodies that idea literally. In the opening segment, in the literal margins of some of the pages, a monologue is carried out by a condemned Inquisitor as he justifies the extreme actions that he took over the course of his career. This game compels you to get creative with its concepts, just like the designers did. This game spawned the Eisenhorn novels. Xenos was a tie-in for this game, and that has broken containment so many times. It's like the go-to recommendation for someone getting into the setting. And this game is the reason that we have the Death Watch. Gav Thorpe just came up with it because he needed an excuse for a Space Marine to be accompanying an Inquisitor on his own. And at the heart of it, it's dark. It's so dark. Everything is fucked, and it is the peak of Grimdark. Bear in mind, this was coming in right about the same time as 3rd edition, when the game started to really take itself kind of seriously. This was there around about the genesis of the modern setting, right about the same time that 40k became what we'd recognise it to be today. So it's really not surprising that this game, or rather its aesthetics, have stuck around as a really popular subculture in the 40k community. If you look up Inquisitor on Instagram, you'll see some really sick models, not just Inquisitors, but their retinue and weird other things done in the same style. And while Inquisitor tried to style itself as a 54mm scale game with absolutely gigantic miniatures, the rules were actually written in a scale-agnostic way. So a lot of people continue to practice this as a 28mm scale game, sort of normal Warhammer stuff you're used to. That's why it has such a strong connection to the web magazine 28 Mag, where they publish some amazing, beautifully grimdark stuff done throughout the community. The team behind it even published their own spiritual successor to Inquisitor. It's called Planet 28, and it's just a bit more of a weird and wacky take on the game system, simplifying some of the unnecessary complexity. But most important to this project are the Inc 28 community. These are the people who keep the vibe of Inquisitor alive, through their miniatures, through their custom rule sets, through whatever they do. Now this is generally shared on forums like Yak Tribe and stuff, but if you want to see finished products, you might want to go to the r/Ink28 subreddit. Now on the Ink28 subreddit, they do a thing called Inktober, and the idea is that they have a prompt for every day to inspire you to do models, artwork, writing, whatever it is you do as part of your hobby. And yeah, I know it's really late to be doing that, but I did it on time. So my project was to do the first 7 days of work, and I did do that on the first 7 days. Yeah, it's bad it took this long. Look, I'm bad at this. Now prompt 1 was Agri Machine. This isn't something I thought worked super well with the rule set for Inquisitor. So I had this epic scale rhino lying around and I made a cool little model out of it. But with that done, let's really get into the meat of this and talk about the proper models that I made. Day 2's prompt was Logis Augur. I wasn't sure exactly how I could fit this in, but it felt right to start on a tech priest. The name Logis Augur sort of came to me as this idea, like a permanent surveyor, someone whose sole job is just to sit and watch and do the shittest work ever that you just couldn't trust a menial with. We've seen some artwork, some really interesting wee little guys that help out with tech priests, and I think it would be more fun to look at those lesser tech priests, the tech priests that don't normally get left alone. The kinds that probably haven't even earned the title Adept just yet. So when I started with this model, I wanted to aim low. Something scrappy, something junky, something that looked just a bit crap. But as I did, I found some excellent pieces. This telescope piece from the Solar Auxilia Command Vehicle upgrade sprue was the perfect central focus for this model. It looked super ornate, and it sort of contrasted really well with the rest of the model, the scrappy robes that I took from an Ashwaste Nomad. Because it stuck out so much, I just welded it straight on. I made it look as superficial as possible, like it had been welded on there as a stopgap answer to some kind of problem. I also added a backpack because I felt like maybe some sort of communications would be right with this. Like, if your purpose is to look at stuff, you're probably also going to need some long-range comms to say, "Hi, I saw something." And this reactor, I think, from the Mechanicus Cataphron kit seemed perfect for it. When it came to painting, I wanted this guy to look plain Martian. Just simple with some of those cog patterns on the robes. I did a lot of thick highlighting just to really make the folds of the cloth pop. And then I dirtied up the bottom of the robes a bit to sort of make him feel like he belonged in the world. Since I've been reading the Inquisitor rulebook so much, I really felt like I ought to give writing some character sheets a go. This here's what I came up with, and I named this guy Adept Warden Ansor Pi. Now I know that's a lot of text, don't worry, I'll break it down for you one little thing at a time. Let's start with the stat line. For some of you, these stats will look very familiar, because this is basically the same kind of stat line that you get for Horus Heresy or for Necromunda. You may note, however, the SG, that's intelligence. They decided to call it sagacity for some reason. Sagacity. And the only really complicated thing about this, besides all the hidden stats that I'm not going to go into, is that instead of like a 1 to 10 stat line, this is more of a 0 to 100. You will be rolling D100s after all, and to get a success, you need to roll under your score. Now with this guy, I kept his mental stats fairly plain, but I wanted to sort of make him feel tough and quite strong, but certainly not quite as strong as some of the other tech priests, like the example one given in the rulebook. Now if we advance towards this massive wall of text, it starts with, which hand is this character's dominant hand? This is something that all characters have, and I've gone with right-handed for most of them. Like I said, this game is probably more complicated than it ought to be, but where that complication pays off is in the equipment, because you can get really specific. I was able to represent every single little bionic that I gave to this guy, from a head with an incorporated, like, breathing grill, to the bionic arms and the claw fingers, to incorporating a bunch of weapon scopes into his eye, his giant telescopic thing. Inquisitor lets you really customize your weapons to make your gunrunner feel quite elite. And part of that is that you can give it custom scopes that do different things, and you can also customize the ammunition. Special abilities too are quite an essential part of these characters. Nerves of Steel is a really basic one that most tech priests seem to get. It basically means that in-game, they don't freak out when people shoot at them because they don't really feel like the average person. I also added quick load to represent the fact that Adeptus Mechanicus weapons are probably a bit more efficient at the loading and reloading of their ammunition. Lastly, and the really scary bit of text that I probably went a bit overboard with, was basically just saying this character can transmit messages to other characters in the narrative. The reason I'm just writing this here is because in Inquisitor, you can give your models some unique war gear that does special things. Because this game isn't really a points-based system. It's more of a, this feels right. I'm going to go with that. And then you make some changes later on if things don't work out to be balanced between two players. There's a reason this game has a third player GM. And that's just about everything with this model. After this low pan shot, we'll move on to day 3's prompt.
A red-robed adept stands watching. At first, you would thought he held a telescope to his eye, but now you see the truth of it. He is a Martian. The telescope is melded to his head.
So the next model I made was based on the prompt Alms Collector. Naturally, this led me to the Ecclesiarchy character archetype. But when I made this model, I wanted it to be something of a subversion. I didn't want your typical fire and fury, combatant, militant priest. To me, the Alms Collector was, I guess, petty ecclesiasticy. But more than that, I wanted to sort of invert what we think of in an alms collector. Very often, 40k has this habit of turning the virtues and sins that we recognise in our own religious dogma on their heads. Think about the following virtues of 40k: hate, pride, intolerance. Whereas virtues such as mercy and calm are quite often demonised. With this idea of inversions, I wanted to make this idea of a priest that took from the poor and would give to the rich, or rather to the wider Imperium. In a sense, they would be a religiously motivated tithe collector. The base model I used for this was one of the House Caudor Redemptionists. These have an excellent range of religious robes that are perfect for any custom priest. Then I built him up with odds and ends, giving him a big base to put lots of little gubbins on, things that he's nabbed. On his back I mounted a big rack full of odds and ends, and then I gave him a giant cogitator of some kind so that he can tally up all the things he's gotten. When it came to painting, I felt something a little more sinister fit him very well, so I went with predominantly black colours with a little bit of red as well. Something of a departure from the traditional white and red robes, but I wanted to lean into that sense of foreboding and of an inverted kind of priesthood. Now, when I came to write the stats for this guy, I picked out a name sort of based on these ideas that I was thinking about. The name Tithe Abbot Poverty spoke to me as so quintessentially backwards in 40k. I gave him some really basic armour, but in order to represent all of his random trash that he has and can just throw at people, I gave him basically one of every standard grenade, and I had his little computer count as essentially an improvised weapon. In terms of special abilities, I gave him Leader, because in my mind, this guy's a rabble-rouser. He doesn't get his hands messy himself, so he's more likely to be telling others what to do. I gave him True Grit to represent this idea that he's just old and stubborn and a bit wizened and just won't die, just won't give in. And Force of Will and Word of the Emperor basically mean that he can shrug off the effects of psychers and demons and stay resolute. In terms of his stat line, I gave him some really piddly weapon skill and ballistic skills. Sort of represent this idea that this man does not fight. He is not a trained fighter, he's not good at it. But aside from that, his stats are otherwise really good, with a very decent strength so that he can swing around his giant computer. A slightly higher than normal toughness, given how he's decked out in just loads of stuff. A low initiative, since he is weighed down by all that stuff. And some pretty good mental stats just to back him up in general.
In this dark hour, the throne world demands more than ever before, the aged firebrand cries. It demands tithe in excess. It demands that even his most humble servants offer personal supplication.
The prompt for day 3 was Street Beggar. Now, I wasn't sure where to go with this one, because I thought maybe this leans into the domain of an NPC or some sort of background character. But as I tried to work on the model, I realised the perfect direction to take it was as a mutant. Now, in Inquisitor, the stat lines that they suggest for mutants are generally really physically bulky. They tend to lean into this idea of the kinds of chaos mutants that you see in CSM armies. beastman type mutants. But in my mind, the more humanoid looking mutants, the people who are just barely deviant, are much more interesting as mutant characters. So I kept this model really simple. I took some basic human bits, just gritted him up. I felt I was able to just be a lot more liberal with where I put my sprue goo, just let his flesh kind of melt a little bit in places and get some extra texture in there. The main thing I kept in mind though is that I wanted him to be a bit wiry. I think the most important detail about this guy is that I gave him a pistol tucked behind his back. I think that just adds a bit of story and character to the model as well. Making this guy's character sheet was pretty straightforward since he has not much to his name. He has some of that basic armor on his body and a simple revolver tucked behind his back. Now the vibe that I wanted to go with for this guy was more of a lithe mutant, someone with a higher initiative rather than a tougher body. And so his stat line kind of reflects this. The only way in which he really excels is in his weapon skill and ballistic skill and his initiative. To back this up, I gave him the ability Catfall, to sort of imply that he can make it through the tricky climbs and scrapes of the Underhive. Also, much like the example mutant Quovandius in the Inquisitor rulebook, I gave this guy a special ability related to the way that his mutations impede him, like a physical disability. Since I'd gone to the extent of giving this guy all this rough skin and gross green buboes when I came to paint him, I felt that it'd be fun to represent on his character sheet.
You see the creature mewling on the stones, kneeling as if it understood nobility. You know it is only right to hold hate for the mutant, and you steel your heart against the sin of pity.
Day 4's prompt was Infiltrator, and I had been excited and planning for this one since I started. In fact, I'd already looked out the leg bits in advance. I might happen to have about 35 sets of Drukhari Scourge legs in my cupboard. Don't worry about it. But where I was going to go with that, I wasn't quite sure. Now, looking through the book, the obvious character archetype to go with was Assassin. This felt right, and Assassins all have a special ability, which allows them to infiltrate better, to sneak around a bit more. But I wasn't a massive fan of the visual direction. It reeks a bit of the 90s and 2000s, just, putting actual fetish gear on display in a rulebook, because why not? But I did like the idea they were going for. Something darker and a little bit perverse. So I leant into the weirdness of the human form. So I nabbed myself one of my Urgles left over from Blackstone Fortress and used that as the base for the body, and already I immediately liked it. On this simple yet grotesque frame, I just built up bits that obscured more and more detail, adding a cloak and a helmeted face looking thing, a simple gun to give him some sort of actionable purpose in-game, and a skull on the side, just to give him some more menace. With painting, I wanted to keep him deeply, deathly pale. I felt that it would contrast really well with some dark infiltrator's robes, and styling it all a little bit blue, I think, gave it some visual distinction from the usually green, darker coloured, sort of dark Eldar colour scheme that his base model might have been likened to. Finally, building up this guy's character sheet was quite an interesting challenge, because it's kind of difficult to make a relatively unarmoured and relatively poorly armed assassin feel really scary. So I kitted out his stubber with some pretty nice modifications to ensure that he could reliably kill another person, giving him some plain armour that's just a bit crap, and leaning into the chem system a little bit. I'll come back to that later. Special abilities wise, I threw the book at him. Acrobatic, assassin, deadeye shot, dodge, fast draw, hip shooting, lightning reflexes. You can imagine how these kind of work. And I feel that they represent what this guy ought to be pretty well. In terms of stat lines, I gave him some absolutely busted stats, but nothing approaching how busted an Officio Assassinorum operative is actually statted in this game. This guy comes from the gutters. He's a piece of trash gunslinger. He shouldn't be quite that good, but with the right training, you can get pretty close. Now, on the matter of chems, I wrote some original chems for this guy, because looking at the existing chems list, there wasn't anything particularly interesting that would aid an assassin gunslinger, because that's not really something they anticipated. But what they did anticipate was people just adding stuff on for fun. So, using his mask as an inhaler, he has 2 doses of this drug, which basically means he's always ready to shoot. Voltaprine, by the way, is a real drug in 40k, and I think it gets mentioned in one of the Warhammer crime novels. I just looked up Lexicanum to get some background on it. but out of the lot that I did, I think this is probably my favourite model.
You find only the whipping of a dark cape as an ungainly figure slips up the nearest wall and beyond perception.
The prompt for day 6, and the last model I'd be doing for this project, was undercover informant. This, I think, was probably the broadest prompt that I was given, in terms of trying to match it up with a character class in the Inquisitor rulebook. The one that I settled on, because it felt right, was Desperado. Essentially, a gunslinger. The base model that I got for this was from the Pontifex Sinestra kit, and it's one of the palanquin bearers. For some reason, they were just so damn huge, and I thought that worked great for a weird, clandestine agent. I did what I could to make him look as official as possible. Like, I've got this idea that he's a really massive guy who's been stuffed into some armour that is a little bit small for him because of his frame. But as I built him, I realised I need a way to communicate why he's an undercover informant, and the Pontifex Sinestra kit also had the answer to this. So on top of some of the poles are tiny little statues of praying monks. But I took this and placed it right in the guy's palm. When I came around to painting it, I did this in a sort of luminous green, which came off really well as a hololith that I could make him speak to as if he was speaking to some secretive master. I gave him a bolt gun as well to make him quite fierce, but also gave him a las pistol, because I just love how blocky and crap they look. There's something about them that I just love. In terms of colour, I went with some more rich robes. This idea of something approaching nobility, or someone possessed of notoriety. Something that fits at odds with his quite unfashionable hair quiff. Making his character sheet was generally quite straightforward. I gave him what he had, a pistol, a bolter. You know, there's actually specific rules for bolters that have a belt feed as opposed to a sickle clip or a straight clip. I was able to actually represent the fact that his armor was painted a reflective silver in the rules, because reflective armor resists las weapons a bit better, as well as a short sword and a few grenades as well. In terms of special abilities, I gave him fast draw, force of will, and rock steady aim. These just mark him out as a pretty competent soldier. For his stat line, his ballistic skills are really good, his strength and toughness are really good, his initiative's pretty good, and then his nerve and leadership are good as well, so he can hold his own. The special thing with this guy is that I was briefed on this special ability. I really like the idea that because models can pause for breath as part of their turn, this idea that they're doing some big action hero montage and they pause for a minute to look around. They do that moment in any action movie where they look around and they spot the thing that they need to do next. But instead, with this guy, he can speak to his little hologram friend. He's going to tell him what the hell is going on around him.
He is massive, beyond what you had until now thought within human dimensions. His burgundy robes are of fine stitching, and the bright metal of his armour marks him as a trusted warrior of the palace.
So that completes all the models that I did for this little Inktober project, even though it's taken me far too long to get the video out. Despite showing off these models at my local group, I have still not been able to convince people to play the game Inquisitor yet. I think it just scares so many people off, but I do have at least 2 people interested, so fingers crossed I can get back to you when I've got some experience with the system. Now, you may remember that I said I was going to do something for all of the first week's prompts, and I'm missing a 7th model. Well, rather than doing a model, you may have picked up on the fact that there have been some narrations. And this comes from what I did do for day 7. I wrote a little short story entitled The Reliquarist, based on that day's prompt, and it ties all these models into its own little narrative. So if that interests you, please check it out. It's up on my channel right now, and I hope I can get that linked properly. We'll see. Now, I have a few more videos planned, but if there's some stuff that you'd really like to see me doing, please let me know in the comments, and please do subscribe, because I'm going to be doing so much more. Thanks for watching.